Okay, dear students, this is the session 3 of your course IT Systems and Logistics. Today we are going to look on how we can map supply chains in order to get the whole processes more transparent for all supply chain partners. The Zoom lectures will be substituted now by videos that you can watch whenever you like, and then we will do the labs in real-time Zoom meetings, because the time difference between our two countries is 4 hours, and that is a little bit too big as a difference. But let's concentrate on the content of session 3 now. The agenda for the video is that we do a short review of session 2 because it closely relates to the topic of today, which is supply chain mapping. So let us review the Bullwhip effect that you have seen. These are the charts that you should get when you look at the Excel sheet of the provided one regarding the online game that we played, so the Mountain Dew game. So remember that the order sizes that you should have agreed in groups while playing the game increase for all supply chain partners, no matter at which position of the supply chain you are. Well, just the oscillation varies. So, for instance, for the retailer, we have seen that the order sizes increase a little bit because the retailer is very closely related to the end customer. But if you consider the factory, then you saw that, well, they are in the supply chain very far away from the final customer and for the real demand. And for them, the oscillation of, or the variability of the demand was very, very high. So inventories decreased very fast for all supply chain partners, but very little for the retailer because of the good demand information at the customers. But if you look at the backlogs for the factory, then you realize, and this is seen also here in this plot, that they were really, really high and very fastly also decreasing. Or the backlog increasing for the factory. And this means also that the costs increased very much for all supply chain partners. Well, little for the retailer once again, but very, very much for the factory. And this is what we call the Bullwhip effect. And as we have seen also that it does not depend on the smartness of the players. And this is an effect that will always in some way or the other present itself. So the Bullwhip effect and the related problems are that we have high inventory levels depending on the stress of the people of ordering higher sizes in order to buffer against backlogs. But on the other hand, we will also experience a very low service levels, so very high lists of back orders for the different players. And these two factors lead to high costs in the supply chain that can be amended somehow if the real demand of the customer would be known by all supply chain partners. But on the other hand, now we have seen in the game and also in the Excel table that the end customer demand was quite stable. Imagine now what happens if the demand of this end customers would fluctuate even more. Then the problems will even be more imminent. So related problems of the Bullwhip effect are that the variation in demand along the supply chain now requires each supply chain partner to hedge against this variation. So the first reaction would be if the players experience these high oscillations and a high backlog, that they build up capacities on each of the different functions to hedge against these variations. So in shipments, so the deliveries of the items, they will build up capacity. In the production itself, so if you consider the factory, they will build up capacity. And also regarding warehouse functions, they will also build up capacity in order to cope with the peaks that they will experience. The problem now is if you have variation, demand goes up, but demand goes also down. And this means that most of the time, this built-up capacity that should cope with the peaks will most of the time be idle. And that leads also to high investment costs, but also recurring costs on a daily basis. So this is bad for all the supply chain partners because they will end up, and every one of them, with high overall cost in a supply chain. And now if you imagine, well, we had a supply chain where we considered just one factory, one distributor, one wholesaler, and one retailer, but and they were interlinked by giving orders and distributing items. But if you consider that now we have more than one player, this multiplies. So now I'm just designing 2 of them, but they can be even more retailers, etc. And they are all interlinked. So the problem is not between individual companies, but we have networks of companies facing the same problem. Yeah, so the lesson learned are now that in these traditional supply chains, the information about the customer, and this is key, about our end customer, is passed only through the supply chain via the orders. That is what you have experienced also in the game. And well, in the discussion of your group, you should have done some kind of forecasting. So doing some little calculation about how much items did you order and what could be the consumer demand that you would face anew in each of the turns that you played. You don't know it, of course, but you can make a kind of a forecast based on the data that you have been given in previous turns that you played. But anyway, the problem is that information gets lost throughout the supply chain because, for instance, the factory does not have information that the retailer has about the end customer demand. And that means that throughout upstream the supply chain, we have high buffer stocks that build up. And on the same time, because first of all, when you see your stock going down, you will order more to have some buffer stock available. So your stocks go down and then they will go highly up because you ordered, well, let's say too much than what you really need. And at a certain stage then when you decrease this buffer because you have so much buffer, the reaction will be that you order less, and that could lead then to backlogs as we have seen in the game. But even now, if you're very good in playing the game for yourself at your position in the supply chain, and if you act, let's say, normally because you do a forecast and you have a good feeling about what kind of demand could go in, the result for the overall supply chain will be always the same. So for the factory, it will be very difficult to get information about the true demand of the end customer. And that will result at the end, when you imagine that you are a real company, you will increase the prices because your costs increase due to this bullwhip effect. And if the prices increase, then you can imagine that you will have less sales. Because customers want to have the lowest price possible. And as said, once again, this is not just for a single company, but it's for networks of supply networks that act as competitors against each other. So the good question is now, what can we do in order to prevent all this from happening? And well, we can do some very basic things, but remember that your course is called IT Systems in Logistics, so IT, information technology, will be able to help to avoid or amend this bullwhip effect. So one thing that the actors can do to avoid this distortion of the real customer demand is that they avoid actions like discounts that we haven't looked into so far. But you can imagine if one company makes a discount for a certain item, then they induce some artificial demand, because their customer will buy more despite the fact that they don't need more. So they will build up some stock at their premises in order to realize discounts. And that will distort also the overall demand of the customers, because they order more that they actually would not need just to realize this discount. Another thing that we can do is we change the structure of the supply chain. So one good thing that we could do is eliminate unnecessary links. For instance, we have seen that we had the retailer. So if you remember our supply chain, we had 4 players. This one is the factory. Sorry for my writing. This one was, I think, the distributor. This was the wholesaler. And this one is the retailer. So the retailer had the information about the end customer demand, and the factory had very much problems with the distortion of their orders. So why not eliminating these 2 players and make the retailer and the factory talk together directly? And then you would eliminate supply chain links. And this would lead to a less distorted picture of the end customer demands. The other effect that we have seen is, well, in the game we had 2 weeks of delivery lead time, or also distribution lead time. So this is a very long time period that applies here. If somehow it would be able to shorten the lead times, then the demands would be realized much faster, and also deliveries would be there in a much better time frame, so that or more regularly, let's say, so that the forecast and the ordering becomes more easy, because you don't have to hedge for these longer lead times, the 2 weeks that we have seen. And another thing, why I said your course is called IT Systems in Logistics. One thing that we can do is get the right information to the right place at the right time to the right person, and that would be the right place. So with the support of IT systems, we can help amend the bullwhip effect. And this leads, would enhance the communication of each of the players within the supply chain. They would pass the information of the customer demand, for instance, directly to the factory, as we have seen if we eliminate the unnecessary links in a supply chain, so that those players can talk directly to each other and know the real demand of the end customer. Another thing is we have seen that the factory was in very much trouble, because they had no good idea about how much to produce, and they also have production lead times. So one thing is that they can plan the production and the processes together with the retailers, for instance, if the other parts are eliminated, and share the information about what is possible to produce in which time frame. And that leads also to a better, the better communication then can also lead to a better understanding of the processes of each of the players and each of the partners within the supply chain. So these are the things that we can do in order to eliminate the bullwhip effect. So one thing that is the topic of today is What we want to achieve is understand each other's processes better, and for that purpose we can do supply chain mapping. Here I will show you a short overview of how that is done. Then we will look at a little bit more in depth on how we apply supply chain mapping. I give you a short example, and then for the lab sessions later in the day, you will experience some supply chain mapping by yourself. So remember once again the structure of the Mountain Dew game. We experienced that a certain structure leads to a certain behavior of the supply chain partners, and that leads to certain events like stockouts or extreme oscillations of demands, and so led also inventory levels or backlogs. So yeah, I don't repeat it. We had the bullwhip effect being caused by different items or different issues. And here you see once again in this picture the bullwhip effect, where the bullwhip would be a kind of a whip for bulls that someone holds in his hands. And you see here, if I put a linear line or a line in this, you see that here we have little oscillations, and if you go upstream the supply chain, then these become bigger and bigger. And this is exactly what we see also with the bullwhip. So how can we do now a supply chain map, and what is that, and why would we do that? We do that to understand the processes of supply chains and supply chain partners much better. So what are their internal processes that they apply in order to pass information? And if we have done such an overview of a current situation, we can use this information then to design information supporting systems for the supply chain, or we can use this information also to re-engineer processes for companies. So how does a supply chain map look like? It looks like this. We have, for instance, if we start the process here for the explanation, we have the customer, and the customer places an order to his or her supplier. The supplier, or that can be also, well, if we consider that this is a company and this is the end customer here, then a whole company, that would be the company with its specific functions. So the company gets an order. This is introduced into a so-called MRP system, that stands for Material Requirements Planning. And I note it to you so you know what the abbreviation means. So MRP is Material Requirements Planning. And such a system helps to plan jobs or items to be produced in a company. So here we have a function that is called scheduling. So the jobs, the incoming orders, are scheduled for being produced at the factory. For that purpose, there needs some materials purchasing taking place. So a purchase order will be issued to the supplier, and the supplier at a certain stage will deliver the items or the raw materials that have been purchased. Then the receiptment of the items takes place, and some inspection of if the quality of the items is met. And then the raw materials, so RM stands for raw materials. They come into the company. And then here we have the system, the MRP system, after the scheduling, will issue work orders for the different machines that you see at that stage here. So this production line is composed by 4 machines. So it's the machine shop, then the welding, then we have the assembly line, and this is not clearly a machine, but just function. Then the shipping, so packaging and making the delivery ready, will be issued. And then we have the truck going out to the customer, who delivers then the items that have been ordered. So that is a whole working process within a company, together with the end customer and the supplier. And what you see here is that some key performance indicators are noted, such as the quantity that will be produced at the different workstations, let's say, of this factory process. The cycle time, as we see here, so the time it needs to produce a batch of orders is, or an item, depending on how that is defined. Clearly, it's 70 seconds. The batch is 1,500 items. Then some information about the setup time of the machine shop, scrap, for instance, so how much defectives are produced sometime by this machine, the rework that needs to take place, downtimes, inspection times, etc. This is here also the number of cells. For instance, a workstation is composed by 8 working cells. The number of personnel that needs to work there in this case would be 4 people, of a total of 34 people available for this kind of work. And here we have information about the shift number. So this is one shift, so one shift during the day, but it can of course be more, dependent on how that is defined. So overall, what do the colors stand for? So the orange colors are the resources that are available for the certain steps in the production line, and the blue information is the measurements of waste during the process through observation, and the green color is the measures of value-added work. So this is then shown by the cycle time. So this is very detailed, but very useful for a company to realize and to get an overview and transparency of the processes that pertain in the company. Supply chain maps have been used in the past more or less to do some more strategic action. One is to increase the outsourcing. So that was the area where companies should concentrate on their core business functions and outsource other functions that do not pertain to it. What outsourcing has led to is that we had increased competition in between supply chains, and also a more complexity building in supply chains. Because if one company, for instance, has all the functions, let's say, internally done, and now they do outsourcing, they diversify to different suppliers that supply the function that was outsourced now. And this means that here we have more links to more companies providing that service, and that leads to a high increase. And maybe this is done also, this is company 1, this is company 2, and these are the service providers. And if every supply chain link would do the same, then you can imagine how much the supply chain complexity would increase with all the partners that then need to talk together. So we could say that in the past, supply chain maps have been, yes, of course, contributed to transparency, but they led also to a lot of outsourcing activities, rendering everything even more complex. How can we define now a supply chain map? The definition given here is that it is a visual presentation of goods, information, processes, and also financial flows that occur throughout a supply chain, up and downstream the supply chain. So here we have a first-tier supplier for a manufacturer. Then we have here the truck that delivers the items from the manufacturer to the supply chain retailer. So this is also one of a classical way of how to depict a supply chain map or how to visualize the processes. Characteristics of the supply chain are now, and this depends now on the focus that you want to draw attention to. It could be either a particular use. So for instance, how does an item go through a supply chain and how is it diversified, or if it's a raw material, where is the raw material be used for? Or you could focus on a certain user, for instance, your own factory or a company or your own factory floor. It could be also drawn focus to the theme of the supply chain. For instance, if the issue is long lead times, then it could be a focus on the lead time management throughout the supply chain that is then under focus. But it could also be other processes, flows, facilities, organizational entities, or also the geographic relation in between companies that could be under the supply chain mapping focus. Such a supply chain is its most use is to increase the transparency of processes. In order to do so, it needs to be easy to distribute, but also easy to understand. So everything that is too complicating should be avoided. And it should be done in a way that it's easy to understand also for those people who do not have an academic study process done. And another thing is that such a supply chain with a different focus should then also support the corporate strategy. So you have a whole loop and a clear strategy for the company in mind when you design, and especially when you redesign a supply chain. This via a visualization, which is the supply chain map. So questions that you can ask yourself if you work in a company that wants to do a supply chain mapping is, first of all, which suppliers supply the company? So who are the suppliers that work with my company together? And which of these suppliers is most vital or mostly important to my products? So if you consider the supply chain map that we have seen with the raw material that comes delivered from the suppliers, which are the most important ones with respect to quality, etc. And this is very key because if you depend with your company on a supplier of a certain item, and if that item cannot be delivered by the supplier, you have quite a dependency on the supplier that normally you want to avoid, because if a supplier has troubles, then you can get easily in troubles as well. And we see that quite often in the automotive industry, where suppliers are very much specified in the items that they supply. So the automotive companies want to avoid that such a supplier has a monopoly of this part or item, and they would support other suppliers to come up with alternative parts, let's say. So one thing that you can do not to depict the overall process is that you take a key supplier out of the picture and then you continue asking the following questions. For instance, how good is the quality of the product of the supplier, and how quickly do you receive the products when you order them? So what is the the lead time of the supplier. Other factors that should be also under review when you do a supply chain map that could affect the supplier as well are very much important, because also they could influence very much the availability of the parts that you need for your own production by the supplier. One can be regulations, specifically and most importantly in our days the environmental regulations. Then employee disputes. So does the supplier experience very often union strikes, which would lead to an unavailability of a regular supply of goods from that supplier? And most importantly also, if there are profitability issues within the supplier that could lead to a kind of insolvency from his part, meaning that they could not deliver the products anymore. Then it comes to more a process that is hands-on. So what you would do next is you would contact the supplier and ask him if they would be willing to team up with you in order to join a project that has as an objective to improve the operations or the processes. And then if you find some of the suppliers willing to team up with you, next questions that you can ask is who are the suppliers of the supplier? So how does the supply chain continue from the part of the direct supplier on? And do they have any internal or external or environmental factors that could affect them? So you would ask once again the questions that you ask from your direct supplier to the suppliers of the supplier in order to get the whole picture of the supply chain. So if we have here the manufacturer, and here is a supplier, and here is a customer, then and if we would define this as a whole supply chain, then the supplier of the supplier would be external to one supply chain. But it depends on how you define the supply chain, because they would also pertain to this supply chain. So you continue the process even further and you extend the picture also to other links of the supply chain. This we would do if we would be together in class, but you can make up your mind on your own now and ask yourself the question or do the process yourself within your team, and pick a company or a business that you are familiar with. Could be also the coffee bar at Good Tech. Of course, this is closed at the moment due to COVID, but any company that you know. And then you could discuss exactly these questions and try to map the processes of this company that you picked. But as said, this is something that we would do now if we would be physically in class. Yeah, and this is the questions then that should pertain to that. Let's continue with the theory. So why actually should you do a supply chain map? I told you now multiple times that it is very good to increase transparency of the overall processes so that everybody understands better how the processes work at their supply chain partners. But very often supply chains compete against each other. So from a more strategic perspective, such supply chain maps and the knowledge that come along with them and the good understanding of it can be used also for strategic purposes, especially if a supply chain needs to compete against another one. Because what we can achieve with these maps is not only transparency, but we can also, and this is most oftenly at the beginning much more important, highlight the inefficiencies of processes that lead to higher cost because of this inefficiency. And it's a very good exercise also for everybody in a company who joins such a supply chain mapping team, to be able to analyze processes and learn this methodology that you will learn right now here in this course. How does normally a process of supply chain mapping takes place? The first thing is that, as we said previously also, you ask one of your suppliers or also a customer to join you in such a project. So you organize customer and supplier teams, and then you create meetings with the management and most probably supply chain directors, because they are higher up the hierarchy and normally they have more power. That shows also their employees that they care about such a project and it's not just an exercise to employ people. The process or the purpose of this meeting is to discuss the current situation of the supply chain partners, and then decide also upon the core competencies that are desired in the supply chain. So which core competencies of a company should be enhanced and which are not so important and can be decreased. So what is the wishes in this sense? What is happening then is that this team starts to draw the current processes. So they define the current state of this value stream map, we call it, or supply chain map. So together with customer and supplier, they draw the current state of the overall supply chain. And that means that they identify activities that are required in the transaction between the customer and the supplier and you yourself in your company. You use now boxes to represent entities and transactional documents like an envelope that we have seen also in our game. And then we use arrows to show the flow of information and products. For instance, here one entity passes an information via some device, that could be paper or something else, to another entity. And this is how a supply chain map goes on. It could be then also that we want to depict the physical flow, so this would be items. And I'm not so good in drawing, but this could be then delivered by a truck. And this would be a supply chain map now that I designed here. In the third step then, when we have the current state of the art of the processes, then we can start the redesigning. So we draw the future state of the value stream map. And in the second stage then, in this third part, we also need to define an implementation plan, because one thing is to have the visualization of the future state and the future processes, but another thing is then to actually change the system. So this includes that areas are identified where the process should be improved. And then if we have these areas, that can be 3 to I don't know how many, then these areas need to be prioritized in order to build such an implementation plan with the areas of potential benefits and also the degree of complexity to implement the plan. And then in a fourth step, the implementation plan should be executed. So we would start with the most value-adding changes first, track the changes, measure the improvement and the cost that go along with these changes, and then go to the next item. So we repeat the process not only the execution of the most value added area, but also the overall process. So this is not something that you do just one time in a year, but depending on how you define this process, you could repeat it every year or every second year. Yeah, so what are the difficulties in collaborating actually with supply chain partners? Because this seems to be quite easy if I show you the process of how to do a process map, how to improve the processes and how to go on with that. But there are difficulties that go along that, because in a collaboration you have factors that influence it. One is the cost, so who pays the price of a change in a system, and how big are the prices. So for instance, if you want to introduce an IT system in one part of the company and you would force your supplier to use the same system, it could be that they have the cost in implementing such a system that you don't have because you have it already. And then who's bearing the cost of this collaboration would be the supplier. And that needs to be amended, otherwise the supplier would not collaborate with you. And then it's also the question about, if you change processes, who gains? So who has the savings then? Who gains? Who has the benefits of this process change? On which side? And questions also raise to sensitive information. So if a manufacturer needs to share the information about the manufacturing plan and with supply chain partners who also compete or who are also part of other supply chains with other manufacturers, they have the information about the plan of this manufacturer and they could share it with a competitor of this manufacturer. And this is something that normally they don't want this to happen. Also when it comes to cost structures of the items that they produce. This is very sensitive information that is normally not shared with anybody. And then it comes also to commitment. So how much is a supplier or a supply chain partner committed to a company? How much do they engage together, and how many others do they have with whom they engage together? And also, and this is very important, the short-term focus on the collaboration. So if there is a focus on the collaboration to be quite short-term, then you can imagine that they would not engage in expensive projects to change processes if they don't plan to work on a long-term basis together with other companies. So here you can make a cut in the video. I will just continue with a business example now. This is a company called Capital Equipment Incorporate with his supplier that is called Mare Technologies. So the Capital Equipment Incorporate company was unhappy with late deliveries of their supplier, and they identified Mare Technologies as being a key supplier and also a bottleneck to their materials and deliveries coming up. And this company, the supplier, was not aware that they would actually impact other business such as Capital Equipment Incorporate. So what did the company do? They persuaded the supplier to collaborate in such a supply chain mapping project together. They created a cross-functional team and then planned for the achieving competencies that they wanted to develop together. They mapped then in the next stage the value stream map and identified inefficiencies through observations and interviews. So here you have the Capital Equipment Incorporate company, and somewhere, but not mentioned directly, yeah, there it is. And here is the supplier Mare Technologies. And as you see throughout the value stream map, there's also other material suppliers taking place in this supply chain. But this is the overall process, and what I want to draw your attention to is here the MRP system, Material Requirements Planning. It means that we have seen also in the supply chain map beforehand. And here you see that the workstation processes, so the processes at the shop floor, which is depicted here overall, is quite complex. So what they did is they mapped the future value stream map with improvements now, and made a prioritization of the benefits and the ease of integration. So if you compare now these two pictures, then you see that, for instance, here the factors that they individuated was that Maretech needed 1 day to insert the sales orders of corporate equipment incorporation, 1 day to insert the sales orders from that company in the MRP system, and then scheduled the jobs to the shop floor. And also the sales orders to arrive at Mara Technology needed 4 days to arrive. And one could ask why this is the case. Maybe they arrived with paperwork as in the old days. Somehow quite a long lead time for that. And you see here that in the future value stream map, they aim for doing these 2 steps in an hourly basis or in a 6-hourly basis. And another thing that they did is that they eased the processes of the factory shop floor and made it more easy to understand and also to quantify. Because you see also here that we have quite some issues from workstation 6 to the assembly line 1 to the final assembly line, and then also to shipment that needed quite a lot of days. And also here we have 14 days from workstation 1 to workstation 2 and 3, and here also major time spans that lead to a very long production lead time. So here we don't have the information anymore about the different times, but here we see that from work cell 1 and 2, it needs 1 day to pass, or the items need 1 day to pass to workstation 3. And this again then 1 day to the final assembly line and 1 day to shipping. That was beforehand 11 and 4 days. So the next thing is then they needed to execute the plan, and for that purpose they focused on those areas where improvements with greatest returns on investment pertained. So they focused on these first, and what they did is, we saw that already in the future supply chain, they were capable of reducing the lead times from 55 days to 42. And they were also capable of reducing the average days of work in process, that is also abbreviated with the name WIP, by 91%. This materialized in a 9% of cost reduction. And this project obviously worked so well that they want to strengthen their commitment to work together also in the future. Yeah, so supply chain mapping can help companies to, for one thing, improve their strategic supply chain relations. So talking together with suppliers already help a lot, but engaging in a project together, this strengthens the commitment and the links even more. Another thing, of course, is that then they can identify the inefficiency that comes with the collaboration in between different companies. And they can enhance the process for communication via the visualization. So how does communication takes place, and are there different tools available to ease the communication and to speed that up? And it's also a good exercise to realize which are the core competencies of a company and to concentrate on them and maybe outsource other functions that are less important. Yeah, here you have given some reading. If this topic interests you, then these are very interesting literature references that if you're interested in and you cannot get them over the internet, I can help you also in getting them. So just drop me a note, an email. Yeah, if you have any questions to this, then please post it in the forum of session 1. We will just collect all the questions there with respect to supply chain mapping, and I give you an outlook on what we will be doing together in the lab sessions. You will be experiencing the mapping of supply chains, and this will be a group activity, so I will group you in the Zoom meeting in groups together. Let's see, 2 to 3 students should be enough. And here you have given then instructions of the case that you should analyze and make a value stream map together. So this is the summary of the operations and the steps. This is the kind of the setting of the case study. And this is then the summary of operations. And this goes on. But we will see this also later in the day. Thanks a lot for listening and watching, and see you soon.